I think those of us that are here probably argue half an hour was more than long enough. So item 9 we're on at the moment, the continuation of the business items, and it's agenda item F, amendments to the Constitution. Can I invite Councillor Patel to move the report?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased to propose the report set out here. And sorry, Mike. There are a number of amendments to the Council Constitution, and there are 2 items we required Council to approve. One is the amendment to the Constitution sets out in Section 4 of this report, and that the monitoring officer has been given delegated authority to enact this amendment, any consequently minor amendment as may require, and publish Constitution accordingly. So I'm pleased to propose the report as set out.
Thank you very much, thank you. Councillor Gold, to second.
Thank you, Chair. Happy to second the report.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mercer.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure of the logic of the amendment to in 3.4 Part 3 Section A of where declined offers have to be reported as well. But if you're going to do that, later on in the same paragraph it says, a councillor must send this form to Democratic Services within 28 days or promptly thereafter of receiving any gift or hospitality. It should say receiving or declining any gift or hospitality.
Thank you.
Can I propose that amendment?
Great. Anyone else to speak to the amendment? Is the amendment agreed? Agreed. Right. Any more questions on amendments to the Constitution? Councillor Patel to reply.
Mr. Chairman, with that amendment, pleased to propose.
Okay, thank you very much. Does the Council accept the report? Agreed, thank you. Item G, decisions taken at Cabinet under the Special Urgency Rule. Councillor Golby to move the report.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to propose a report. I think it's a very short report and does exactly what it says on the tin, so I don't think there's any need to make any further comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Morris.
Yes, very happy to second the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any comments, questions? Hey? Councillor Stone.
A comment and a question, thank you, Chair. This is a really important service that I've totally lost sight of. For years and years and years, I was very involved with the connection service. It was outsourced to Prospects, and ever since then, me and I assume the rest of the council have lost a grip on what's going on. I think if we're being asked to approve these delegated powers, we should be given more information. We need to know what the budget reduction is. We need to know what impact that's going to have on the service to our NEET children. And we need to know how successfully that contract is being delivered. We've got no oversight of any of that at all. And I have to say, I was really, really cross when I went to Prospects with a young person to introduce them to the service and found the door closed. So whereas once upon a time there was a 6-day-a-week service, it then went down to 5 days, I believe it's now gone down to 3.
Sorry, can I just remind councillors that it was a decision this, and it's just a report to Council. Can I invite Councillor Golby to reply?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Happy to present the report as discussed. I think Councillor Stone's point, I will try and find out or get a summary of exactly what services delivered by Prospects. And if, as for all members, if there are any issues with anything ongoing, please let us know through the relevant Cabinet members, and we'll always try and pick that up and do what we can. But happy to propose the report. Thank you.
Thank you. Does Council accept the advice? Thank you very much. Item H, Council meeting dates. Councillor Patel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Pleased to propose that the Council approves the meeting dates for 2020 and 2021 as is set out in the papers here.
Does Council accept the advice? Yeah. Councillor Ty, were you going to second, were you? Okay. Councillor Stamber, we've finally got to you.
It's okay, Chair. Thank you very much. So, just on the meeting dates that are in the list, I totally get that we have to schedule some dates, just in case the Minister doesn't do his thing with the structural change order and other things happen. I note that Councillor Smithers raised that very point at the Joint Committee earlier this week. What if it all doesn't happen? Just a question about the meeting schedule for Thursday, the 18th of February 2021 at a 10 a.m. start. That would imply a budget setting meeting. Is the Council... I get that we will be setting a budget if unitary reorganisation doesn't happen, but if it does happen, I'm pretty sure we won't be setting a budget. Have I got that right?
Councillor Longley.
Yes, just to answer that question, we actually have continued putting a 4-year plan together.
Councillor Patel.
Is to propose, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Does Council accept the advice? Thank you very much. Item I, the additional terms of reference for the North Northamptonshire and West Northamptonshire joint committees. Can I invite Councillor Golby to move the report?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As we know, back in February, we all agreed, all the 8 councils across the county, to set up the North Northamptonshire and West Northamptonshire joint committees. That happened. The West Northamptonshire committees met a bit earlier, followed by the North Northamptonshire committees. They've undertaken, and many of us have been involved in some of the subcommittees for the different parts of those meetings and have contributed to them. But one of the points that was made back in February was that if we need to revisit the terms of reference, we can do so. So this basically asks us to revisit some of the points of the terms of reference to allow those committees to carry on working and to carry on functioning as we move forward. And those are outlined in Appendix 3. And I'm sure if there's any points of clarification, the Monitor Officer may help us there. But one thing I did want to comment on, off the back of what Councillor Stamber said, was that earlier in the week, which was confirmed in a letter to me yesterday, that the Secretary of State and the Department have agreed the structural change order will be laid before Parliament in October. Now, we can have a little chat about that now, or I can refer to it again in my leader's report, but that is as good as a green light as we've got so far. So the clarity is beginning to come, the timescales are beginning to arrive, and the road to unitary starts to gather at pace. But going back to this report, I'm very pleased to recommend it to Council. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Smithers to second.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In seconding support, I would just like to mention the work of the Northamptonshire Joint Committee, on which I'm one of the members for the County Council. The Joint Committee has to date met twice, 24th of June 2019 and 16th of September, also 2019. The working groups, 4 working groups were established to consider governance, statutory officer appointments, proposals for schemes of members' allowances for the Shadow Council, and terms of reference for the North Northamptonshire Joint Committee. The Northamptonshire Joint Committee has also received presentations from Local Government Reform Integrated Programme and updates from the working group that good progress is being made on each of them. The Northamptonshire Joint Committee has agreed the terms of reference set out in Annex 2 to this report, and both of these in Annex 3 for the West Northamptonshire Joint Committee are put before Council today for approval. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hales?
It's just a query, Chair. It's this, when I was reading the Public Health and Wellbeing Board minutes from the 11th of April, there was a comment in there from the Chair of Health Watch, and he'd recently attended a conference in Kettering, and he was raising concerns that with the creation of the unitaries, there was no conversation held around equality and diversity, which is essential to the health and wellbeing objectives being aimed. So can we be assured that they are within the remit of the new unitaries going forward? Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Stamborough?
Thank you, Chair, and apologies, I left my microphone on just now. I'll try not to do that again. So, firstly, looking at the appendix number 2 to the report, which lays out the proposed amended and augmented terms of reference for the Northamptonshire Joint Committee, and there are 11 what appear to be substantive items. And then there's a section headed potential additions to current scheme. And I'm just wondering what the status is of those potential additions. Have they been added? Might they be added? Potential additions doesn't really imply that they're currently going to be added, so I'd like to know what's going on there. And I'd like to mention one of them, number 18, which is a new provision and talks about ensuring that members are kept fully briefed and engaged in establishing a new unitary council. That would be really welcome. Some of us, and I'm one of them, don't feel fully briefed or engaged at all in this process. In fact, in the main, I feel in the dark and excluded from this process. So it would be useful to be better informed. I'd also like to welcome what the leader has mentioned regarding the structural change order, and that the current minister is getting his act together, which is great. I note in the report that a draft was shared with the councils in Northamptonshire some time ago, I presume, and that now the wording has been approved. Perhaps that could be shared with all members, so we can all be aware what the structural change order says, or maybe we can just see the draft and know what it might say. And finally, just a worry around timing. So the Leeds report regarding the structural change order, which is mentioned in this report, tells us that what happens next should take 6 to 8 weeks from the middle of October. Could have started earlier, but someone wanted to prorogue Parliament for some reason. That takes us to the middle of December. Before we know it, we'll be in the Christmas recess. It could well be January before MPs and Laws Committees put a final motion back to Parliament. We're going to get to the point where it's going to be very difficult to plan elections if they don't get a move on. I would hope that the leader is taking every opportunity to make that point when he's at Whitehall speaking to ministers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Griffiths.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Picking up on Councillor Hales's point, I can confirm that on the next Northamptonshire Joint Committee, that equalities and diversity will be on the agenda. Picking up on Councillor Stamborough's item about fully briefed and engaged, it is of course the Sovereign Council's responsibility to ensure that members are fully briefed and engaged. But the other point about the Joint Committee is it is a decision-making committee, and I'm looking forward in the next weeks and months to make some really important decisions which can then be scrutinised as an ongoing process.
Thank you very much. Councillor Auger.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's just a question for the leader. I thought about doing it offline, but it's probably important for all of us to know. The letter the Secretary of State sent us with regard to the clarification, his latest clarification, can we share that with partners? There is obviously a lot of interest throughout the county, in our constituents with regard to where we are. I know there was a sort of embargo on the draft, but I'm just wondering, can we share the letter from the Secretary of State that came through most recently? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Our Chief Exec would also like to contribute to this, so if I could invite the Chief Exec to talk.
Thank you, Chair. Just in response initially to Councillor Stamber's questions as well, and to Councillor Auger, we did receive the confirmation letter on Wednesday. We had a phone call on Tuesday. I received a call early on Tuesday morning from MHCLG to confirm that the Secretary of State had actually signed off the structural change order draft at about 6:30 that morning. So he's been busy. We have the draft. It's currently with all councils just for sign-off, and there's some very minor tweaking. We have all agreed that that will be published. It will go on the websites, and just so you're aware, the two websites for the West and the North went live this week, so that letter will be published on those websites for all to see. There's nothing in there that's not what you would expect that's not already in the public domain in any case that we've discussed previously. The timing of that and the advice from MHCLG, who visited on Tuesday, was that it will be laid at the end of October, and we had all of the questions, as you would expect, all the leaders queried timing and process, and there was very clear lines of direction of travel on that, and that is if it's laid by the end of October, and obviously that's an if, and none of us have crystal ball on that. That would be good if we did, but if it's laid by the end of October, which they hope it will be, and an election is called, it can go into the urgent business pool. That would be cross-party agreement if that was then to proceed without a discussion, parallel discussion in both houses. If it wasn't laid at that point, well, then it would have to wait until after an election. If there was no election, it would then proceed as we expect, which would be a debate in both houses simultaneously, and that would take probably 6 to 9 weeks, so it would be Christmas before we get final sign-off. However, I think there's only on one occasion in the last century that an order that was laid was not carried through, and that happened to be a casino in Greater Manchester, which I was familiar with at the time, and I had to do with Gordon Brown, I think. So that's the only time that that's ever happened, and that's not to say it couldn't happen again, but MHCLG are very confident that hopefully the structural change order will get laid in the period of time we have after the recess. Again, that's assuming that things in Westminster run in a reasonably, well, I can't even say predictable way because that would be nonsensical, but at least that we can get into that window of opportunity. So that's the up-to-date position as of today.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you. Could I invite Councillor Golby to sum up?
Thank you, Chair. I think some of those points were covered off, but on some of Councillor Stamber's finer points, I'll perhaps check with the monitoring officer and come back to him. But Councillor Hale's equality and diversity, I would assume, but maybe it's worth challenging, the whole of the programme, that is something that is taken into account. We have had representations at the West Joint Committee around these sort of issues, and also on behalf of the voluntary sector. But we're just going to make sure that is a part of the wider programme. I think one of the first things I did when I knew that we were getting some news on the structural change order is say to the Chief Exec, we need another briefing for all members. The depth and breadth of the programme is huge, you know, from issues with the Children's Trust, what we're looking to try and achieve with health and adult social care, all of the whole transformation process. It's massive, and to keep everybody informed very regularly is a big challenge, but I think we need a big substantive session, and I've asked for that. Hopefully we can get that in October, where we even open it up to a couple of the other councils maybe. But I think we've got to let everybody know exactly where we are, give everybody a chance to kick some of the issues around, and put some challenge through the officers, because the Leaders Oversight Board is a big part of that interaction and oversight of the programme, naturally by the name. But I hear loud and clear we need to make sure we keep our members informed. In terms of timing and the structural change order and how late can it go, obviously we need to look at elections, but I've understood from MHCLG when they've spoken to us that it could go through as late as March. That would still enable us to have an election in May. But we hope, and we've now seen an intent to get it sorted as soon as possible. We've lobbied MPs, and I met with Andrea Leadsom just a couple of weeks ago, made the point to her, and I know she acted on our behalf. I got a letter, and then 2 days later, not that it was just because of Andrea Leadsom, we heard from MHCLG that the Secretary of State signed it at 6:30 in the morning. So the system is working for us, and we've just got to keep the pressure on to make sure government and the department hears what our needs are, what our asks are. But coming back to this point, Chair, I'm happy to propose this to Council. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before we move on, the monitoring officer has got a couple of comments to make.
I was just going to address Councillor Stanborough's question of the use of the word potential. I didn't want to assume that the proposed additions were going to be additions. So perhaps I could have used the word proposed rather than potential, but in the minutes, the actual amendments will be recorded. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Does the Council accept the advice of the report? Thank you very much. We move on to item 10, Cabinet Business. And first of all, a report from the Leader of the Council, Councillor Golby. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of things to highlight. One is the conversation we've just had, that news that the structural change order is finally taking shape. And of course, when we have that substantively, we'll make sure all partners and of course all members get to see that. So that is very welcome. It gives us some clarity and direction, notwithstanding the issues that we're very familiar with in government, what's going on in the courts and everything else. But we've got to deal with what we know about and the known knowns, and until there's anything different, then we look at how that takes shape. Another point is we had the Chancellor's announcement a couple of weeks ago, the Chancellor's statement. Our early indicators show that that should be quite helpful to us here. Without the clarity and the work on the numbers yet, we're not 100% sure, but we've got through the Society of County Treasurers, people working on that, and when we know the clarity of what the different parts of the statement, which I've got summarised in my report, I'll make sure we all know that. But it is looking that is going to be helpful for us next year, because we knew next year is going to be another challenge for us. But that is very much welcome. I've written to the MPs to thank them for some of their support in some of the issues. But the rest of the report is there, and if anybody, I'm happy to take any questions, Chair.
On your seat should have been some questions as well, and if we can go through the questions. Has everyone got a sheet? Number one question to Councillor Baker. Councillor Birch, have you a supplementary?
No supplementary, thank you.
Thank you very much. Question number two, again to Councillor Baker, again from Councillor Birch. Any supplementary question?
No, thank you. Sufficient answer.
Question three to Councillor Bowen from Councillor Birch.
I know Councillor Bowen isn't here, but I think it would be very useful if councillors had updates to know how some of the actions on these motions are progressing. Thank you.
Okay, we will pass that supplementary question on to her to answer on her return. Question number four, to Councillor Golby, the Leader, from Councillor Roy. Have you any supplementary question that you want to ask?
Just to ask, thank you for the response. Will the KPIs and impact assessments be published? What's the expected date of the first impact assessment, and what's the expected cost savings?
Chair. I'm not sure what that was.
No, I was trying to work out what it was, yeah.
I'm not sure of, sorry Chair, I'm not sure of when and where those items will be published, but I'm happy to take that up and follow it up for Councillor Roy, Chair.
Thank you very much for that. Question number 5 to Councillor Nadine Hawley from Councillor Roy.
I did try and talk to Councillor Nadine Hawley, and it's regrettable and unfortunate that I didn't get to speak to her outside of chamber on this. But I do find the response a bit confusing, because I have had, at least it says that there have been no Freedom of Information Act councillor issues and questions taken through a Freedom of Information Act process in the past 12 months. But I have one currently that I sent as a councillor inquiry that is going through. I've been told in writing that it's going through a Freedom of Information Act request. I understand that it's complex, and I'm happy to take it up with the portfolio holders outside of council.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I haven't had I haven't had Councillor Roy has not approached me personally or emailed me, so I don't know anything about that. As far as the other issue is concerned, I will look into that and get back to her as soon as I can.
Okay, so you'll reply directly to her?
I will do, yes.
Great, thank you for that, yes. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Anyway, I will reply.
Okay, we'll leave it with you, yeah. Moving on to question 6, question to Councillor Golby from Councillor Stone. Councillor Stone, have you a supplementary?
Thank you, Chair. Just one supplementary. Could we have an assurance from the leader that about the role of the commissioners? Can you give us an assurance that the commissioners don't delay implementation of the actions sought by the professionals because of budgetary considerations?
Thank you, Chair. I think perhaps the commissioners need to ask, that question needs to be put to the commissioners, but as far as I'm aware and I see, the commissioners want to do everything they can to improve the services across the board, not just in children's services. But one thing the commissioners are quite clear on as well, that if we have a proposal, it needs to be fully costed, and we need to know where the money's coming from. And frankly, that is the right way of going about business. Where we do have issues that, especially around the Children's Improvement Plan, we're working closely with Malcolm Newsom, the Children's Commissioner, to make sure that if there's an ask of the Council, it does get put through to government. So there is full engagement, but we have learnt in the past, and some of the issues that we're dealing with now are because of the way perhaps problems were tackled. We keep putting money into the problem, it doesn't necessarily solve it. So we've got to be very careful and very clear that what we do gets the best value for the service and for the Council. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Question number 7 is a question to Councillor Morris, again from Councillor Stone. Have you a supplementary question, Councillor Stone?
Yes, please. Thank you for your very lengthy reply. In the second paragraph, it says we don't have enough capacity to do as many reviews in the time that they need to be done. And we know that that causes high costs, or the potential is that we're paying for high cost packages for longer than we need to be. What is the proposal to address that issue?
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Stone, for your supplementary question. I'm happy to take that question offline and answer it in more detail, but if you do look at the answer, what we're doing at the moment with Newton Europe and the work that we're doing on the target operating model and our processes will hopefully allow us to work our way through more of the backlog of the scheduled reviews. And certainly it's something that everyone in the service is very conscious of, and are working very hard to try and rectify. But I will come back to you with a more in-depth answer, if I may. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Question number 8, again to Councillor Morris from Councillor Stone.
No supplementary, thank you.
Thank you very much. Question 9, question to Councillor Golby from Councillor Eales. Any supplementary question?
I've got some quick fire supplementaries, Chair, if I could.
Okay.
Councillor Golby, you talk in your answer about developing a new career progression structure. I was wondering, can you just give us some insight into how much that would cost to develop and implement? And connected with pay, in your report you say at the bottom of the second page, we're clear in our commitment to include a 2% pay rise to staff for the next financial year. Can we be clear that that's unequivocal, that staff will get a pay rise for sure in the next financial year? Obviously that would constitute jam tomorrow because they haven't had a pay rise this year. And could I ask, has the leader considered that whilst it doesn't put money in the pockets of our staff, could we perhaps consider as an authority to give people some extra time away at Christmas, I know the 23rd and 24th of December, to give people that time off as a little thank you in recognition of their long suffering without getting a pay rise?
Okay, thank you, Chair. I can answer part of that, and Councillor Stamborough's question in the same breath, I think. I think this year we made it very clear that we would like to make a pay award. There was a contingency part in the budget that, and we've said that when, after the different periods of the year, we would review that, and if we can afford to, we would make it, and that still stands. In terms of next year, I think, rather than be unequivocal, our commitment is to have 2% in the budget for next year. Now, that will go through the scrutiny process, and we've spoken with the Chief Exec and the Commissioners to make sure we've got to do something to reward our staff, and acknowledging the years that we haven't been able to do that. So, yeah, that is a firm commitment, certainly next year, and that commitment lies this year. If we can afford to do something, then we will. In terms of the cost of the progression, I'll have to request that and get that to you, Councillor Eales. And also your other question about can we do anything else around the time off? Yeah, it's a suggestion. I will take that away and we will discuss that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Question 10 is again a question to Councillor Golby, this time from Councillor Meredith. No supplementary, thank you very much. Our last question, question 11 on the back page. Question to Councillor Golby from Councillor Chris Stamborough.
And I do have a supplementary, Chair, so thank you very much. Thank you very much, Councillor Golby, for your reply, which doesn't answer the question. The question was, will the leader give an undertaking to backdate that increase, that is the increase that may or may not be paid in this current year, when implemented, to April 2019. People will draw their own conclusions from the failure to answer the question. However, I do take much heart from the leader's clear commitment to include a 2% pay rise to staff in the next financial year. I look forward to seeing that in the budget proposals when they come out in November. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That covers all the questions that have been submitted. Can I ask Councillor McGee if he wants to ask a further question?
I do. A question to the leader of Councillor Morris. I have wrote an email to Councillor Morris, the Director for Social Care and the Director for Public Health, to come out and visit a centre with me. Does the leader agree that any centre that provides mindfulness classes, blood pressure checks on a regular basis, fitness, many different fitness programmes, as well as healthy, cheap meals and transport to and from villages in and around Corby should be supported by public health?
Anyone fancy answering that?
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Morris?
I think when I spoke earlier about the public health funding for centres such as I think the one you're describing, there are rules as to how that money can be applied and spent within the communities and within the community services. We are working with all those providers to see what can be done, but there is Public Health England have changed the rules on where the funding can go and how it can be used. It is worth noting that this isn't county council funding, it is direct government funding for these projects through Public Health England, and they dictate essentially how this money may be spent. Of course, we sympathise with the point that you make about these centres. They are an important part of our community, and we will all work as best we can to try and maintain those services. But strictly speaking, it's Public Health England that fund those services, and therefore we have to abide by their rules. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Stone.
Could I ask the Leader a couple of questions on his report? I'm looking at the figures given, which are in the main national figures, but there is one which I presume is a local one. It says we're going to get £700 for send. I'm just asking if that is a typo, because 700 isn't really very much money. And my other question is, if we do get an allocation of money for social care, children's and adults, will he be using some of that money to restore the funding that's being taken away from the voluntary sector? These are our partners in care. We depend very heavily on the contribution they make to services, and we know that cutting those services in the end costs the social care budgets a huge amount of money. And then the other question is, in your great long list of things, apart from the £700 send money, there's no mention of fairer funding for schools.
Councillor Golby.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's clearly not £700, so I will just get some clarity on that. Of course, if there's additional money, the whole system is crying out for it, certainly in social care, adult social care and children's services. There's talk of a potential bad winter. We know how fragile the whole system is, even though it is working much better together now. So we've got to be very balanced in how we apportion money. Of course, we value the voluntary sector and understand the challenges they've had, over the last few years, and some of the money that's been withdrawn from them. But we've got to look very carefully about where this money goes. And believe you me, some of the conversations we have through Malcolm and with the commissioners, we've got that every penny is really, really valuable to us. So we've got to make sure we get as much bang for the buck that we possibly can as we move things forward. In terms of the schools funding, I should have put that in there, and it was remiss of me not to. I'm very keen to get some clarity around what the announcement on schools funding means to us in Northamptonshire. I think we should have some good positive outcomes, but we've got to wait until, like everything else, we get the clarity on the figures, basically. But I'm very keen to understand what that is, and as soon as I do know, I will make sure everybody knows. Thank you, Chair.
Any more questions to the Leader? Councillor Stamber.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have a question on the Cabinet decision note from the 10th of September, specifically item 6, which was the monthly revenue monitoring report. And in that report, we were told, amongst other things, that the Council had decided to refinance a substantial amount of loans over a period of 40 years at an average rate of 1.68%, and that had caused an adverse movement in the current year of £150,000, i.e. we had voluntarily decided to take on extra costs to this council by refinancing loans over a longer period at a higher interest rate than the interest rate we could get by taking them over a short period. And that will be a cost every year. Next year, £200,000, I'm told. Does the Leader not understand, I'm sure he does, how that might disappoint some people who know that this council is seeking to mitigate overspends, that we have voluntarily, of our own free will, decided to take on extra costs? And because of that, we then make it more difficult for us to get to the point where we can decide to pay our staff a pay increase. What does the leader think of that, please?
Thank you, Chair. Well, I understand the process behind making that decision, and I think I'll delegate in a second to Councillor Longley to give his version of the thinking behind that. But I understand it was well thought out, and in the long run, it puts us in a decent position to be able to take advantage of some rates which may cost us a little more, and the cost of doing that in the short term is a little bit more on the revenue. But I think overall it is a good decision. Thank you. Councillor Longley.
You are indeed a rare bird, because if anybody in this room here could borrow money over 50 years, 40, 50 years at 1.67%, I think they'd bite their hand off. And that's the view we took, is that it's a short-term loss. That's absolutely true. Nearer 200, by the way, not 150. And it's 1.67, not 1.68. But the situation is we were borrowing we did 110 million approximately, and we did approximately 10 million over 6 years, and the balance of the 100 million over 40 to 50. Now, the significance of that is more than just the numbers, because at the end of this was short-term borrowing. It's 1 year money. I thought everybody understands that. So in other words, at the end of the year, we had to cough up 106 million. Now, the reluctance of some other authorities to lend to us meant that the likelihood of, instead of being 1.1, that rate would go up. So the judgment was, should we then go for the long term, 1.67? Are interest rates going to go down in the future? Who knows? They're highly likely to go up. I can remember when interest rates were 14%. So I think it's a very sound and prudent thing to do. And given that question again, I would do it another 100 million if I could.
Thank you very much. Can I ask Council to note the report and questions and answers? And someone's pointing in someone's direction.
Chair, don't you want to just announce the car first?
Yeah.
And then someone.
There was some. Sorry, I thought everyone had finished speaking. Yeah. Before we do that, can I just say something about the car park? There's a car blocking the car park completely, apparently, and it's a Honda Jazz, if anyone owns such a vehicle, LB54PRX. Malcolm. We'll let you know if anything happens in your absence. Yeah. Right. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Right. Okay. Councillor Stone, you wanted to ask another question, I believe.
Thank you very much, Chair. I wanted to ask a question on the Cabinet decision statement from the 9th of July on item 14. It talks about independent supported accommodation and supported lodging for young people leaving care. And it's talking about launching the procurement process for those. So the question I want to ask is, do we have a supported lodging scheme for young people leaving care? If we have, I haven't heard about it, and we never had one before, so it would be a new service. Are we still putting young people into independent supported accommodation, even though that accommodation is unregulated, even though it's been criticised by the inspectors, even though it's become a bit of a national scandal that yesterday was picked up by the BBC?
Councillor Golby.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll perhaps have to ask through Councillor Baker that she gets a detailed answer to that question, but I do know after the issues raised by Ofsted on independent, unregulated and unsupported accommodation, there's been a massive effort through the Directorate to do something about it, and there's been a big focus on it. I don't know if the Chief Exec could comment or somebody from Children's, but I can give councillors assurances that a lot of work has gone into that.
Chief Exec.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Chair. I can part answer your question, Councillor Stone. I'll be happy to give you further information as well afterwards. And as you know, we were criticised in the Ofsted report for unregulated places, and we have been making huge efforts, including converting some of our own properties, and we're just awaiting Ofsted registration for those properties to be able to put some of our young people into those that we will own ourselves and control ourselves, and they're in county, so it'll be a much better outcome. We've got 3 properties currently, 1 we own, 2 we're renting, or 2 we own and 1 we're renting. If that's a successful approach, we'll look at acquiring more to take that approach in county, because it's a better outcome for young people to have them close to their family and friends in any case. So yes, we are taking some action, but it is a lengthy process. The property's ready, completed. We're just awaiting registration in that instance.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Councillor Eales.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A question connected with finances. Unfortunately, the individual who was trying to speak earlier on, representing local businesses in the town centre, was unable to do so, so I'm going to do so on their behalf. What message has Councillor Golby got for town centre businesses in respect of the proposed car parking charges, and what reassurance can he offer? My mind goes back to Monday night when Councillor Golby and I stood shoulder to shoulder in voting to oppose the current proposal to increase the car parking charges around the town centre. So it would be really lovely if Councillor Golby could give a statement of intent that as the leader, that this authority won't follow through on that proposal. I mean, there is a growing groundswell of anger out there. There is talk of protests and stuff, which I'm not partaking in personally, to give you some reassurance. I know what you're thinking. But it would be really positive if we could finish on a high, and Councillor Golby could say that won't happen, that won't be implemented. Thank you.
Could I just say before Councillor Golby says anything that it wasn't in the leader's report, the items you mentioned, so it is completely up to the leader whether he replies or not.
Yeah, I'm happy to reply to that.
Okay.
As I'm aware, we didn't vote to oppose it. It was a motion that was put at the borough on Monday that was amended. What I will say is, after the issues that were brought to the fore around the parking charges in Northampton Town Centre, I met with Jonathan Nunn, Councillor Jonathan Nunn, leader of MBC, to talk about the implications and actually how the consultation can actually add weight to the borough's parking strategy that they're talking about putting together. So there was a lot of concern around the start of the consultation, indeed the timing, which we've extended. And the borough are actually keen that we look at the results and what people are saying to talk about things like whether we can perhaps introduce something like colour-coded parking schemes and some of the things that you see in other towns. Councillor Smithers and I met with him and we had a really good conversation. So we said that let's see what the consultation brings back. Of course we want to support the businesses of the town centre through this, and let's use that and get some value out of it to inform the borough's emerging car parking strategy. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Can I ask if Council approves the report and the questions and answers? Great, thank you very much. Thank you. Item 11, scrutiny businesses next. If I could invite Councillor Scrimshaw to propose the report.
Thank you, Chair. Happy to do so. Scrutiny, as you know, the new scrutiny committee was set up a year ago. The report outlines the work we've been doing in that year. I've also tried to give a flavour of my thoughts about that committee in the summary at the start of the work. I don't intend to say all that again, but I would like to thank several people involved in scrutiny. First of all, the officers, particularly those from Democratic Services who directly support the work of the committee, but also those officers that have been before us answering questions. Sometimes those have been robust sessions, but I'd like to publicly thank all those involved for their professionalism and the way they've handled that. One of the things, apart from the direct things we do and have done, one of the things I hope to achieve with the committee is for the decision makers, both cabinet, both senior officers, just to consider before they make a decision what would scrutiny say, what would scrutiny think, and I think that's happening. So hopefully there's some good things in here, but I'm happy to take any questions, Chair.
Could I ask Councillor Perry to second the report?
Yes, happy to second the report, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Councillor McGee.
Thank you, Chair. I hate to put my comrade in a difficult position sometimes, but questions do have to be asked. When we had an inspection from the Public Scrutiny organisation, it suggested that if we do scrutiny of the budget at the last minute and then we're doing it wrong. Finance scrutiny, under my understanding, has not had the opportunity that we said, this council said it would give them, to start doing the budget early. Or am I wrong? Is it going to be a last minute few weeks where we cram everything in and people try to talk about it? If so, we've ignored the advice that put us in a bad place in the first place. And while I've got the opportunity, I'll ask them, given that the remit is mainly finance, how do we, as councillors, frontline, backbench councillors, get an opportunity to ensure that services are being provided properly? We don't get that opportunity. We don't get it in public health. We don't get it in many other areas. How will we get that opportunity? How do you see us getting that opportunity?
Thank you very much. Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also would like to thank all the members of that committee that's put in the work, which has been very interesting, very valuable as we've gone through the year. But one of the areas I'm concerned about, and I see that the committee has been concerned about, because there's a number of items where it's included children's services in their scrutiny, some of it financial, some of it looking at the programme. And we heard from Councillor Golby earlier on that the children's services are looking at an improvement plan, been working hard over the summer, and presumably we'll see that coming forward soon. We know that we don't have a separate committee these days to deal with that, so can I have assurances that the scrutiny committee will deal with that, or that perhaps we could have a meeting of all councillors where we're briefed on that plan so that we're all aware and scrutiny can contribute in a very concise way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Councillor Hales.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to raise two questions, and one of it is the links with audit, because when we've actually, if you've taken the bother to read the audit report, there's two issues in there that scrutiny has also looked at. One of them is the early years payment. Can we assure that this is now all being put to right? Because I actually try and attend as many as I can, because as a backbencher, unless you actually sit and do your paperwork, you don't feel that very involved when you were in the previous scrutinies. And I can understand why the reason they say finance is everything, but I also think the services to the members of the public are equally more important. And it's also then picking up the issue that was also highlighted in the audit report, was around the Section 17. When we've done payments before, when we got into trouble with public health, can we be assured that, if we don't have any more problems around them areas where there seems to be slight difference of opinion on what we use the Section 17 for, how the payments are and what the payments deliver? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Auger.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think scrutiny is one of those cross-party endeavours which makes local politics so much more easier and makes so much sense. I'm grateful for the leadership of our Chair and for those who contribute on the other side of the aisle, and also his comments earlier about Cabinet looking at, when they're making policy, about how would scrutiny view this. We are all passionate about delivering good public services. We're not actually there to trip up anyone. We're actually there to dig deep into the policies, the protocols, the working practices, the spend, and to ensure that the public are getting good value for money. So I'm grateful and privileged to be part of that, and I'm grateful for my colleagues on both sides and I hope that this council see it as a positive on how cross-party can work together for the benefit of our residents. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Stamborough.
Thank you, Chair. So, firstly, just to embarrass Councillor Scrimshaw a bit further, I agree with Councillor Auger. I can't think of anyone better to chair scrutiny at this council than Councillor Scrimshaw. I think he does a brilliant job, and I'm glad it's not me. Right, okay, so I note in his report, however, that he talks about scrutiny being done in a constructive and apolitical way, and I have to say I absolutely agree. It worries me slightly that I have heard it said that there might be people in this council who think scrutiny is being political. I don't think scrutiny is being political. Not only that, I think members of the scrutiny committee go out of their way not to be political. We may be political in other arenas, but at scrutiny, it is not a political function. We do not operate in a political way, and I'm sure the Chair would agree with me there. I'm also very pleased to see that it's being considered as best practice that we have 3 vice chairs to give a cross-party feel to the leadership of scrutiny. I think that's brilliant. So more power to scrutiny's elbow, I think.
Thank you very much. Councillor Golby.
Thank you, Chair. I welcome the report, and although the comments around the pure focus has been on finance, I think you only have to look through the report to see that scrutiny has actually covered a lot of quite a diverse set of areas that are all really important to the council, and I thank everybody for their input on that. In his introduction, Councillor Scrimshaw talks about 2021 looking forward, and I just wanted to make the point and put the challenge to scrutiny, if you like, that the scrutiny of this year's budget is a massive undertaking for this council as we set to lay the foundation for the 2 new unitaries. And I would like to think that if one of the legacies of scrutiny here, given that this is probably, I think, the last budget that scrutiny will be scrutinising, that they do the best possible job that's ever been done on any scrutiny going back however long, because we know of the criticisms, we know of the past, we know of the will to try and fix that and put it in the best place possible. So I just wanted to put it out there, and I'll be happy to meet with the Chair and the Vice Chairs to say, look, let's really make a good effort on behalf of the budget, on behalf of our residents, as we look to set through that process, and hopefully we can start that earlier than previous, that has been in December this year, to really add value to that process and get the best out of everybody and their contributions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Griffiths.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, I know I wasn't able to attend this morning, and apologies for that, but is it just me, or do I get a feeling of the tiny shoots of cross-party working and a better atmosphere in this chamber today? Or did I miss something this morning? Mr. Chairman, I really do hope so, that we have a more joint working and a less partisan relationship as we carry forward into unitary. People have said, as a leader of a council that doesn't have a scrutiny function, that I'm anti-scrutiny. Far from it. All I want us to do is scrutinise good decisions.
Thank you for those comments. Councillor Longley.
Well, buoyed up by Martin's comments there, I just wanted to answer questions over there about the last minute. There is a programme put together now that brings the scrutiny and the budget making forward, and there is a programme there which will be published fairly shortly, specifically to have everybody involved at an earlier stage. And as I said so many times before, we haven't got a monopoly on good ideas, and so we look forward to everybody having their input. But the point being, it has been brought forward, or is being brought forward.
Thank you for that. Councillor Brown, you wanted to add something?
Yes, please, Chairman, if I may. Just want to say, Mr. Chairman, that although recent events in my life have kept me from the last couple of scrutiny meetings, I thoroughly look forward to the meeting later this month, and I would echo Councillor Auger's comments around the fact that scrutiny as an apolitical organisation is actually one of the most fulfilling, one of the most productive parts of council from my personal perspective. This arena is often more theatre than productivity, but at scrutiny I feel that we are doing something of value, and I often come out of our meetings feeling that it was worth the contribution of everybody's time on the day. Now, I think the issue around budget scrutiny has been well aired, so I won't continue down that theme, but I would just like two clarifications, or certainly 2 points of feedback from the scrutiny chairman, if I may. The first is around the arbitrary limit imposed upon us in terms of the number of substantive items on the scrutiny agenda. I'd be interested in the scrutiny chairman's opinion on that matter, and whether he believes that we should have more flexibility, particularly in times of when issues arise that are of great public interest, whether we should be allowed the flexibility to pursue more than those two lines of inquiry. And lastly, during our last period of budget scrutiny, we had a member of the public attend the place scrutiny meeting, raising some quite serious concerns about the delivery of the highways contract. I know that at the time there was an undertaking that those issues would be taken back to the scrutiny vice chairs, and that matters would proceed from there. I haven't heard much, if anything, since then. I would be grateful for an update, because certainly from the point of view of my residents in a rural area where the state of some of the roads are of great concern, they would like to see us pay a very close eye on the state of the highways contract delivery. So just clarification on those two items would be appreciated.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Councillor Perry, did you want to...
If the public saw us operating in scrutiny, they would have a very different view of politicians, and that has been fed back to us by members of the public that have attended. They've said this feels completely different from what we see in the chamber and elsewhere, which I think is a credit to the chairs and the members of the committee. Obviously it's up to the chair, not one of the vice chairs, to answer the questions, so I just wanted to raise one point that I think it was Councillor Scott or McGee raised about children's scrutiny. It's very challenging for us as corporate parents to have appropriate and effective oversight of such a large and significant and directorate and important, because ultimately the buck stops with us. So my question, it probably follows on from Councillor Brown's, is that with the issues in children's, and we have brought it to scrutiny, that going forward it is so important for us to have that oversight on what's happening, because all of us in this chamber are responsible. And it's all right when the commissioners came in and said, right, we're getting rid of children's scrutiny, but the buck stops with us. So I think we're quite within our rights to say we want to have that oversight.
Thank you very much. Councillor Eakins.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It was quite interesting, and following Councillor Griffiths and Councillor Golby's leads into the, as we're moving into Ward 2 unitaries, and I'm delighted to hear that the draft structural change order was received in the Tuesday's LOB meeting. What I'm a little bit concerned of is, I've read the report on the cost of delivering the LGR, the Local Government Review Reform, although it's a lot of content in there, but I'm really concerned about the last section in there where it said the committee also recommended to the Leaders Oversight Board there should be ongoing joint scrutiny of the delivery of the LGR programme. The Leaders Oversight Board considered this recommendation and its next following meeting and decided that no additional scrutiny arrangements were needed at this time, although it might change in the future. Mr. Chairman, we are a sovereign council, as well as part of a member of the JC. And what I would like to understand is, without the fear of being labelled as somebody who doesn't understand it, somebody who's difficult, and if they were employed, they'd probably be fired. It was reported at the LOB that there wasn't a decision-making body, but the decision-making body was with the Joint Committee. So what I'd like to have a little bit of clarity on is the actual role of the government and the governance of the Leaders Oversight Board, and does it include any robust scrutiny of on behalf of the Northamptonshire residents who we represent? And then when making these recommendations to the JC on behalf of the NCC and also on behalf of the Ds and Bs.
Thank you very much for that. Could I...
The Chief Exec can answer if you
Oh, great. The Chief Exec can answer that, apparently. Chief Exec?
Thank you, Chair. Possibly not all of it, Councillor Eakins, but I'll do my best to answer a little bit of it anyway. Just in terms of the decision that was made around scrutiny, that was around the collective scrutiny, and the decision was that scrutiny would happen at the sovereign authority base and not at the collective base at that time. So there was recognition that it was the responsibility of the sovereign authorities to carry out that scrutiny, not least because there's very different scrutiny arrangements across districts and boroughs, and therefore there was a very thorough debate had by leaders as to how that would be best achieved, and the collective decision was it would be best achieved at the sovereign authority level.
Thank you very much. Could I ask Councillor Scrimshaw to reply to the...
Thank you, Chair. I'll try to pick up as many things as I remember. On that last point, I was disappointed that the response from the Leaders Oversight Board was there was no current need for scrutiny on how that progresses is of interest, because if the sovereign bodies, i.e. this being one of those bodies, is going to scrutinise that, and some of the other districts and boroughs don't have a scrutinising function, there's probably something still to be worked out. Councillor McGee, you asked about pre-budget scrutiny, which I think has been touched on briefly. It is probably true that the Scrutiny Committee through the last year has had concerns about how we will be able to do effective pre-budget scrutiny for the forthcoming budget. I've had conversations with the Commissioners, Chief Exec, various other people about how we can do things differently. And yes, we are going to get the draft budget much earlier this year, November rather than December, so that will give us a little more time to look at it, so it's not rushed into a couple of weeks in January. Whether or not there are other things that can be done before then, I hope that's true, and I understand a programme of how the draft budget is being put together and will be sort of delivered is about to be signed off, in which case scrutiny hopefully can look at that and see if there's any way we can input it. Councillor McGee, I think you also mentioned that our main remit is finance. Absolutely is, although it's true that we've also tried to, as best we can, look at other issues around service delivery. My own view is that everything this council do is connected to finance anyway, so it's difficult sometimes not to. And Councillor Scott, you mentioned in particular children's. Clearly, children's has been a particular interest of the committee. For many years, children's has often been the area in this council that has had budget difficulties, and that's true indeed this year, which is one of the reasons we've been highlighting it. We have looked at the financial issues, but that clearly does involve also the service issues around there, and yes, we will be looking at future developments, improvement plan, etc. I do quite like the idea of having an all members briefing on this subject. One of the things I am aware of is that there are certain number of councillors on scrutiny, a few members of this council on cabinet, but for everybody else, if they don't go to cabinet, if they don't go to scrutiny, they might not know what's going on in the council. So I think it would be useful to have more all-member briefings. I think scrutiny, one of the things we're trying to achieve is a better understanding for all members of what's happening. Councillor Hale's early year payments, that's something I'm particularly pleased about, the way we addressed that. We got members of the public who were directly affected with that around the table with ourselves and with officers, and that was a very constructive meeting. A constructive and hopefully useful report went to Cabinet, and they did take on a lot of what we said, and those initial problems have, I understand, been left a little bit. You mentioned Section 17. I picked that up also reading the audit reports. We haven't specifically looked at that. I'm not personally entirely sure of what that is, although I've obviously read the audit report. I'm trying to fix up a meeting with the relevant officer, and I had hoped to do that this week, but unfortunately we weren't able to. But yes, that might be something that scrutiny want to look at. Councillor Stambers, Olga and others have spoken about how constructive and apolitical they think the meetings have been. I'm really very proud of that. I absolutely think that all the committee members from whichever particular political party have really gone out of their way to work well together. I understand the distinction between working together in that sort of environment and being political possibly elsewhere. I hope other people understand that as well. But certainly, you know, as an opposition councillor myself, I'd love to be in charge of the council, but I'm not, and I therefore have a political dimension to bring. But I and others, we're all elected onto the council to help make this council run better and more smoothly, and scrutiny is a really valid way of doing that, and I think I hope that's appreciated. Apologies if I've missed anybody.
I'm sure you haven't. Thank you very much for that. Can I ask Council to note the report? Thank you very much. Item number 12 is the motion submitted by Councillor Smithers. Before we start that, could I invite Councillor Brian Skittrell from Wellingborough Council to address the Council? If you could come down to the lectern at the front, that would be really useful. And you've got 3 minutes to address the Council.
Thank you, Chairman, and yes, we are. Thank you, Councillor Smithers, for bringing forward this item. It's given me a reason to do something I've long intended to do, which is observe one of the county council meetings, but I'm here to speak in support of the motion. I'm speaking not just for myself, but for residents in my ward in Wellingborough, and the other tree-lined avenues in Wellingborough, where we are losing the old tree to disease, and the residents are very concerned and very sadly miss the trees that are gone and wish them to be replaced. As well as the Far Cotton group, there is a community group in Wellingborough that also wants to work with the council to replace this tree, and in some cases wish to adopt trees to make it easier for the council to fund the establishment of these trees. Some years ago, when these trees first started going awry, we worked with Councillor Lawman, who found a policy that seemed to suggest that design trees should be replaced. And when we followed that through, the residents were given details that involved an onerous cost to the residents to establish and maintain the trees through their lifetime. Tree planting is one of the tools in combating climate change, and with your recent motion on climate change, this would be a small but not insignificant measure that would help achieve those goals. So it achieves more than just improving the neighbourhood. It will help in your fight against climate change. So I urge this council to support the motion and to investigating working with communities to do it in a cost-effective manner. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that contribution. Thank you. Could I ask Councillor Smithers to propose the motion next, please?
Yes, I'm happy to propose this motion. On behalf of Northampton County Council, notes the outstanding work of Save Our Trees group in Far Cotton, and the work they've done in bringing both MBC and NCC together with the Woodlands Trust to look at the experimental project for reinstating trees in Northamptonshire. Sorry, is that better? Northamptonshire County Council also notes the work of the former Mayor of London, Boris Johnson, recently newly elected as our Prime Minister, in reinstalling, thank you very much, for 20,000 street trees in our capital during his tenure as Mayor of London. Not only has this transformed the streets in and around the capital, but it has also brought about huge benefits to the wider environment in efforts to combat climate change. He also delivered upon his pledge to create 100 rejuvenated spaces as part of Pocket Parks programmes in 26 London boroughs, with more than 25 hectares of community land across the capital being transformed into new enhanced green areas. Northamptonshire County Council calls for a transformation of underused urban spaces across our county to be planted with new trees to help future generations enjoy what many of us have taken for granted for years. Trees deliver huge benefits such as cleansing the air, storing carbon and generally enhancing with the well-being of our communities. To ensure future generations receive these benefits and Northamptonshire grows sustainably, we all need to protect existing trees as well as embarking upon a bold programme of planting new trees. Therefore, this council requests the initial work to form a joint plan for a wider scale reinstalment of trees, street trees, in the part of move to unitary. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hallam to second the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I second the motion and reserve the right to speak.
Thank you very much. An amendment has been proposed to this motion and has been put on your chairs apparently, so everyone should have the amended motion. And Councillor Stone is going to move the amendment for us.
Thank you very much, Chair. We've agreed, haven't we, that there is a climate emergency, and we know that we need to take lots of different actions to address that issue. And one of those actions needs to be a really serious programme of tree planting. And so it's very welcome that the same motion that went to Northampton Borough Council on Monday has come before this council too. On Monday, the Labour group sought to strengthen that motion because while it's good, maybe it's not good enough. And that is what this Labour group's motion is about. So in the original motion, I think it's really pleasing that it recognises voluntary and community effort. I think it's really good. It's seeking to protect existing trees. It's suggesting a programme of planting. But I do think it does need strengthening. So we don't just need street trees. We need many, many more trees than our streets could hold. We need to start creating new woodlands. We need to be encouraging homeowners to do more planting in their own gardens. And we need a programme of tree maintenance. Above all, we need to be a lot more ambitious. Planting 20,000 trees over 8 years in London is not very ambitious. So if you go onto the present Mayor's website, you will see, for example, that with the voluntary community agencies that he was working with, he planted 80,000 trees in one weekend, and he's got a huge programme to green London. In fact, the ambition there is to make 50% green space. It's that kind of, I would call it transformation, that we need to be very ambitious with and that we need to want for our own county. I don't think it's good enough just to suggest planting, because planting trees can be problematic and it does need a lot of thought and a lot of maintenance, the right trees in the right location. So it needs a strategy, and it needs a strategy that the county should be working through, in my view, with the boroughs and the districts, so that we have got a plan ready-made to take into the unitaries if and when they happen. I hope that you will support our amendment, which seeks to strengthen and not take away from the original motion. Thank you.
Councillor Hales, are you going to second the amendment?
Yeah, I rise to second the motion. I mean, when I read this motion, the glaring obvious was no maintenance within it. And as councillors know, the amount of complaints I get about trees, in the pathways and inappropriate trees placed within, certainly within the terraced roads in Kettering. And there has been a number of incidents when mobility scooters have actually turned over because the routes are that through the pavements that, people have actually been injured because there is no maintenance programme. Trees have to be pollarded, and actually when we plant new trees in urban areas, they actually need to be placed in a tree pit so the roots are contained and don't spread and damage the foundation of houses and that sort of thing. I says, the numerous times, now it's coming into autumn, my inbox will be full of complaints. A lot of it is because of the mature trees, especially when you look at the ash trees, and they shred, it goes into the gutters, and then you've got a lot of elderly people. I've actually got Ash Road that's full of ash, and the complaints they can't get the gutters clean because they're absolutely full of them. We need to put trees that are appropriate. The lime trees are another massive problem. If you've got a car and you park it under a lime tree, you've got to keep out continually washing it. But I think maintenance is the most important thing with these trees. There's no good just digging trees, holes and filling them with trees. They've got to be properly looked after and maintained. So please support the motion because you need to maintain these trees.
Thank you very much. Councillor Smithers, do you accept the amendment?
Mr. Chairman, no, don't accept the amendment.
Okay, thank you very much. As the amendment's not been accepted, we need to debate the amendment. And one or two people have indicated they want to speak, but we are speaking to the amendment, not to the main motion. So if you are on that list and I call you inadvertently, just say no chance and I will move on to the next person. Councillor Auger, I expect you want to speak to the amendment, don't you?
No, I'd actually like to speak on the motion. I don't agree with you.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Brown?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'm joining my colleague, Councillor Smithers, in rejecting the proposed amendment. During his election campaign to become London Mayor, Sadiq Khan promised that he would plant 2 million trees in his first term as London Mayor. In fact, 50% of his tree planting to date took place in this one weekend, cited in the proposed amendment. His record on tree planting is as big a failure as his failure to keep the people of London safe during his term as London Mayor. We should not seek to emulate Sadiq Khan in any way, shape or form, and I reject the amendment.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Stambler, the amendment.
Absolutely, Chair. On the amendment, and Councillor Brown has beautifully illustrated my point, which is that the amendment compounds the error in the motion that I'll refer to later, which seeks to make a political point in the amendment, and as a result allows other people to make political points. And I think that's where the amendment is deficient. It would have been much better if it had sought to strike out some of the paragraphs in the actual motion and insert text about trees. But there we are. So it's deficient, I'm afraid.
Thank you. Continuing with the amendment, Councillor Dudley Hughes, did you want to speak to the amendment?
No, I vote.
Thank you. Councillor Sylvia Hughes? Councillor Strachan? No, I'm sorry if I startled you there. Yeah. Councillor Scrimshaw? Councillor Scrimshaw? No. We seem to be sort of confusing ourselves. I've got a huge, great list here, half of which don't want to speak. Councillor McGee, you'll help me out, no doubt.
Thank you, Chair. Is either naive or doesn't want to carry on the cross-party agreements, the good feeling that we've had all day. Instead of getting rid of the politics from it, you start mentioning President Boris Johnson. Where is the agreement for us where we can work together on something we know is the right thing? So why do you have to be so bloody political on a subject where we can all agree? It's either naivety or stupidity. I am not sure which one it is yet. So this motion was the right thing to do, and I see the two young gentlemen at the back, Chair, want to speak. These are the ones that wanted half an hour for dinner and then took 55 minutes. So we shan't be listening to what they've got to say. So, Chair, we tried to help in this. Maintaining trees is a burden on all councils. And all we were trying to do in this is to make sure that it was in there to help control and make sure that people didn't have problems later. That was all we were trying to do, Chair. So it's a great shame that Councillor Smithers has politicised it.
Thank you. Councillor Hallam, did you want to say to the amendment?
Thank you. I'll speak briefly to the amendment, Mr. Chairman. I think it is a shame, and I'm trying not to get drawn into the trap of who was the best mayor of London, because actually the intent on this motion, when it was first pulled over the road earlier in the week, was to praise the community group, was to praise the partnerships that were involved, that are actually quite complicated to pull together, and then to look at ideas and ways in which we can scale it moving forwards, not to turn into a debate on who's the best mayor of London. The reason why the mayor of London is mentioned originally was obviously because of it's important to look elsewhere at other schemes, and I'd have rather that Labour have come with an amendment to say, why not look at this council? They did it as well. Why not look at this council in Scotland or this council in Wales too? That would have been really helpful. It's not. I sense, Mr. Chairman, that this side is going to be against this because of the politicisation. I would propose that we move to the vote on the amendment.
Is that the will of the council? We move to the vote just on the amendment. We are voting in favour or against the amendment. Well, hang on before we take the vote. Councillor Brookfield, did you want to say something, or were you? You were waving your hand to vote, were you? Good. That's really good. Those in favour of the amendment being carried? Those against? The motion is lost, so we go back to the original motion that Councillor Scrimshaw proposed. I won't say it again, you all know what I meant, yes. We will continue with Councillor Auger on the main motion, if we may.
No. Button.
Councillor Auger.
Yeah, thank you so much for those shoots of cooperation that Councillor Griffiths talked about earlier on. I was just it was just an observation really. My new role on the Local Government Association at a meeting in London last week. This became very, very important about the importance of climate change and a climate change emergency. I think cross-party now, everybody accepts that it's important that we do something. Of course, we can go big or we can start small and grow. But the important thing is that we do something. Every council needs to begin to do something. And this is where I think that Councillor Smither is in tune with the national feel on this. And I think it would be great for us this to be a beginning of something bigger in helping this council and then the unitary do their bit to combat the ever-growing threat of climate change. I will be supporting this motion.
Thank you very much. Councillor Lorman.
Thank you, Chairman. Very much welcome this motion to Council. The recent publicity about the fires in the Amazon has increased awareness of the benefits of trees. For information, one beech tree provides enough oxygen for 10 people. To breathe. The UK has the lowest population of trees in Europe by square meterage. Trees are homes for birds, hedges in particular being lower absorb car fumes. Trees are a sound barrier. They protect the verges from the parked car, all in addition to looking wonderful and slowing water runoff. In Wellingborough, we have about 76,000 trees, of which 5,000 are highway trees and 5,000 amenity trees. And it was the removal of some of the diseased highway trees that was the spark for the creation of the Welly Trees Facebook page, which led to pressure to Wellingborough Council to consult on approving a tree policy, which ultimately was approved, in addition to already having a tree and landscape SPD. The aim of the group was to replace removed trees and plant new ones, and they've also, as with the Far Cotton Group, obtained whips from the Woodland Trust, which are being propagated and some are planted. One issue they found, Councillor Smithers, was that in order to get permission to plant replacement highway trees, residents were asked for a commuted sum of about £4,000 from the County Council for maintenance. And I think that is probably quite unreasonable to expect a householder to provide £4,000 to replace a tree on the verge outside their house. Whilst we recognise that councils have responsibility for safety, they need to do all they can to enhance it. I hope the NCC will also, if it hasn't already, sign the Woodland Trust's tree charter. And we also note that the government has appointed a tree champion, Sir William Worsley, who has issued an urban tree manual to help councils. And the government also has launched an urban tree challenge fund with £20 million available over 2 years for trees. And again, I would hope NCC might try and submit a bid. So I would welcome Council assisting and planting of the correct trees, as Councillor Hale says, in partnership with the boroughs and districts, and also with the statutory undertakers who have the right to remove trees without warning should their works determine it. So I welcome this motion. I ask everybody to support it and trust that this council can make the moves that I've suggested in my report.
Thank you very much. Councillor Dudley Hughes.
Thank you. I'm all for trees. You've just planted some, but please can we follow the example of Milton Keynes and plant trees that don't grow too tall, because that way we have minimised the amount of maintenance. They what they call half standard, I'm told by my friend here, are half standard trees, not full trees, because that way we don't have all the problems of them getting too big and also needing all this ridiculous amount of money to maintain them.
Thank you very much. Councillor Brown, you wanted to speak to the main motion?
Yes, please, Chairman. Yes, 2 bites to the cherry on this one, and I promise this time round I'll try to be slightly more friendly to everyone across the chamber. I just wanted to provide my support to the motion, and whilst this motion sets out a very strong case, we're doing everything we can to plant trees in our urban areas to improve the air quality and the street scenery. I think it's also massively important that we continue to do whatever we can to maintain our stock of trees and the environmental quality of our rural areas. On the 9th of October, the Secretary of State for Transport is due to make his decision on the Northampton Gateway strategic rail freight interchange that's proposed for just outside Milton Mouser. If he finds in favour of that application, it would result in the loss of dozens, if not hundreds of trees, hundreds upon hundreds of acres of open countryside and historic hedgerows. I just want to put on record my hope that the Secretary of State will reject that application, as this County Council rejected the proposed plans for near Milton Mouser, and through that he will do his bit in ensuring that this county remains green and pleasant for all who live here.
Thank you very much. Councillor Perry? Oh. Councillor Griffiths.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very difficult when other speakers get before you and you have to change your wording a little bit. But Wellingborough has more trees than people. We have 2 large urban extensions underway, both that include open spaces and trees, and completes our green corridor throughout the town. I know one thing that will get people sap rising, and that is trees. In 2007, I was at a 2-day course out of town and was subjected to unbelievable attacks on social media when some trees in a very leafy part of Wellingborough were taken down because of disease. They were taken down without the knowledge of the residents, and that is particularly galling. You only have to look at some of the examples of trees and the problems with councils, such as in Sheffield. Now, Trees and climate change work hand in hand. Now, since the last council meeting, in my town, we've had a small climate change protest that achieved absolutely nothing other than a public backlash. But we have achieved our first climate change cross-party subcommittee that has achieved lots in the space of 2 hours. I'd like to congratulate Councillor Hallam and his NBC colleagues on what they have done, both with regard to this and electric charging points. I don't want to cover what Councillor Lorman has said. To sum up, Mr. Chairman, trees have no political allegiances, but they do play a part in keeping us alive and breathing. So for once, can the opposition get behind and support this motion as written for the benefit of the residents of our wonderful county?
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Gonzalez de Savage.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Everyone supports the beautiful countryside we have and the vibrancy of Northamptonshire. Certainly in my division, it's very clearly obvious that the beauty of the trees is certainly a very important area, a very important matter for leisure, de-stressing and certainly enjoying what we have around us, which is an urban area very nicely connected to the beauty of the villages. Mr. Chairman, I do agree absolutely that we do need plans to plant and also to maintain, but they have to be on a scale which are manageable and effective, but also that they are affordable. And that does come down to large landscape plans, not just obviously small maintenance plans. So I'd urge all to do that. We're also working with the parish councils, Mr. Chairman, which are really important to understand and appreciate. They have a role to play too. So I know that West Hunsbury and East Hunsbury parish councils are very much behind this too.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Showhand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I'd like to thank the Cabinet Member in charge for bringing this motion forward because it is a very important one. We've all got a responsibility to future-proof this county and make sure that we do preserve the greener areas going forward as well, especially in light of everything that we've seen with the fires in the Amazon and so on. I think it's very important to recognise the work of the voluntary groups and for groups mentioned such as a group in Far Cotton. I've personally volunteered myself for many, many years planting trees, and there is a group that I'm involved with the Centre of Oneness, who have planted 50,000 trees all across the UK, and in the last few years as well. So I look forward to speaking to the portfolio member in charge about this group doing more work around the whole of the county. I believe we've planted some trees in Yorkshire, London, Leicester, as well as not just urban trees but forested areas as well. This evening, West Hunsbury Parish Council actually got an agenda item to plant more trees in West Hunsbury, and these will be fruit trees which will benefit the residents. So it's good to see that the parish councils in my area are very active and are looking forward to enhancing the area in this way. And as a final note, I'd like to say that I'd be supporting this motion and look forward to working quite actively towards this work, especially in the light of going forward in unitary. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Brookfield.
Thank you, Chair. I propose that we just move to the vote.
We've still got about 10 names to go on my list. If someone seconds a motion to move the vote, we need to take that. Does someone second
Mr. Chairman, I'll second that officially.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, we have a right to speak, surely.
Yeah. Can we take a vote on whether we want to move to the vote? Right. Those in favour of that? Those against? I think that's fairly clear on. Okay. So we've moved to the vote, and we're going to vote now on the motion. And before we do that, we need Councillor Smithers to sum up for us. Come on.
I'm not going to I'm not really going to sort of drag this out any. Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I'm not.
Councillor Smithers is going to.
I'm not going to sort of drag this out any further, and just to thank everybody for their comments, both on this side and that side, and so on, and suggest that we crack on and move to the vote.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Right, we're moving to the vote. Those in favour of the motion. Seems fairly clear. Anyone against? The motion is clearly carried. Thank you very much. Yes.
Could I just make a comment?
Yeah.
And the comment is, I would like to invite all our colleagues here to the Eco March that is organised by school students for tomorrow, meeting at the BBC in Abington Street at 12 o'clock. They've been very busy getting permissions from all our schools to allow the pupils to come out at lunchtime for the demonstration, which will be going to All Saints Church. And the hope is that as many councillors will join them to show that we really do mean what we say in recognising the climate emergency. And the hope is that the CEO will support staff here coming out in their lunchtime to support those young people too. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you. Item number 12, next. 13. No, 12. Shall I say? Is a motion submitted by Councillor Birch.
Right, thank you, Chair. Right, that's my papers. There we go. Right, this is a very straightforward motion, a request for information from the Children's Commissioner, Malcolm Newsom. A huge amount of work has gone into restructuring the operational side of children's services. There's a business plan and now an improvement plan, an early help subgroup, a social care improvement board and a multi-agency improvement board. This is all about how the Council will react and respond to the families, children and young people who present as vulnerable and in need of support. It's a great responsibility, and it's right that the Council has the processes and acts to keep our residents safe. But a whole area of the latest Ofsted report appears to have been overlooked. And for the children's services to improve and address some of the underlying causes which bring children to the attention of the statutory services, more has to be done. We need to be informed of the strategies and measures which will be put in place to address the issues raised. So, based on the Ofsted recommendation, we need to see return to multi-agency locality working. The Children's First Business Plan noted there should be locally based, integrated, multi-professional teams co-located with partners where possible. The Children's Commissioner states that a partnership approach is underdeveloped and the county, districts and voluntary sectors are not working together effectively. The capacity of some specialist support services is not enough to meet needs. Some support services have been decommissioned or significantly reduced because of budget pressures. Nationally, 1,000 children's centres have closed since 2009, while 760 youth centres have shut since 2010. This is where locality working takes place. Vulnerable children are continuing to pay the price as councils face funding cuts and soaring demand for help. The case for early help and prevention is overwhelming. Ofsted report states, what needs to improve is strategic development of early help services to ensure that children's needs are identified and responded to at the earliest opportunity. There's a clear moral and economic case for investing in early intervention. Failure to provide early intervention in health and education costs an estimated £15 billion a year nationally. Can we see a programme which addresses these aims? The Council does have an early help and prevention strategy. It was last updated in August 2016, but it's not referenced in the improvement plan or the target operation model, the Ofsted report or any of the Commission's recommendations. The inspection report found that children in care were living in unregulated and unsafe places, and some care leavers were vulnerable and homeless. I'm pleased to hear this is being addressed. The business plan states the need to ensure supported accommodation and supported lodgings are available for care leavers, ensuring care leavers have help and advice made available to them to support their transition into adulthood aged 25. All care leavers have pathways, and in most cases young people were involved in writing them. However, many plans lacked specific actions, timescales and clearly defined outcomes for young people. Pathway plans are not always updated when circumstances change for our young people. Again, none of this is referenced in the Commissioner's recommendations. It is a programme to address these aims that we are asking for today. I hope you will support this motion.
Thank you very much. Can I ask Councillor Stone to second the motion?
I'd like to second and reserve my right to speak later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could I ask Councillor Golby to start off?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Councillor Baker was going to address our views on this. We are going to accept the motion. We had a discussion about it the other day. I think it's right that we ask the Children's Commissioner to come and report to Council. He's been here for quite a while now. We have seen the other Commissioners at our meetings, and it's only fair that we ask the same of Mr Newsom. So we're happy to support the motion and agree and move on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Councillor Scott?
I'm happy not to speak, Chair, after the leader has spoken about supporting to save time.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Scrimshaw? Good, good. Councillor Perry?
Yeah, just one thing I wanted to stretch it probably a little bit further, and this goes back to what I was saying about us being responsible for children and maybe not knowing what's going on. It's very difficult as elected members when we're asked by the people that elected us what's going on in a directorate that's been moved further and further away into a trust, something that we can rage against the machine, but the trust is happening. And it's already difficult for us to have insight on what's happening, and what seems to be happening now, it's been moved further away. So I respectfully ask that we're consulted on future progress within the trust, and that any further proposals for the structure of the trust and plans go before Cabinet and go before overview and scrutiny, so that we can fulfil our duty as corporate parents and actually say that we've had some oversight on what is happening. So I'm not going to go on about the fact that something's been imposed on us. I can't do anything about that, but we can respectfully ask that going forward we're fully consulted at every level. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Clark?
Very briefly, Mr Chairman, just following what Councillor Perry said. I support this motion, especially with respect to two parts of it. That's reference to the Children's Trust. We've talked about the Children's Trust a lot, yet we know very, very little about how it's going to be made up, its governance, and the ultimate question is a Children's Trust going to materially improve the services provided by Northampton County Council Children's Services? That question, as far as I'm concerned, has not been answered. The word new has been used a lot, but I remain not so much an atheist on this as an agnostic. I remain to be convinced that setting up this body will actually contribute to the goal which we all hope it will. Second point is this: there's mention in the motion of the role of the Children's Commissioner. I have to say, Mr Chairman, I am disappointed that at most of the meetings I've attended in respect of children's matters and the trust and so on, there's been a notable absence of the Children's Commissioner.
Thank you for that. Councillor Mercer.
Thank you, Chairman. I apologise for lengthening the debate when people are all in agreement about this, but I share some of the concerns that have been raised here. This council went down a rabbit hole a few years back by outsourcing things to a ridiculous degree. Far too much was outsourced, and we're now trying to bring it back in. When you outsource to that degree, you lose a degree of control, and when you lose a degree of control while retaining responsibility, you've got a major problem. You cannot have power without responsibility, and you cannot have responsibility without power. When you separate the two, you've got long-term problems. And so, unless someone can convince me that a children's trust is somehow far more accountable than what we've seen in the past, which led us into problems, I will have severe doubts about it. It's not, as far as I'm concerned, a proven matter. Like Councillor Clark, I remain an agnostic, but a very sceptical one, and I support this motion to the hilt.
Thank you very much. Can I ask Councillor Birch to reply? Oh, did you want to say something, Councillor Stone?
The whole point is to make our children safe and keep our children safe, isn't it? And we're not in charge of what is going to be happening in terms of future services. And I think, for me, that is regrettable. But whatever happens, it is our job to make sure that we get the best possible outcomes for our children. And one of those things that's really, really important to me, and I think it's important to all of us, is how we maximise the energy, the commitment, the creativity, the goodwill of people in our communities. We know that they share our commitment to keep our children safe, and so by devolving services locally and creating community hubs, we draw on all that energy, don't we, that we know exists in our communities. For me, that is really important. Nobody can keep our children safe just as a service. We rely on the goodwill of lots and lots of other agencies and their support in terms of service provision. We know that prevention is so much better than bringing hundreds of children into care. We've got to stop doing that. We've got to prevent our families going into crisis, and we know that we can do that. We've done it in the past, we can do it again. The two big things that were highlighted in the Ofsted report was about joined up services, children's services and housing. Huge issue. How is a trust going to manage that? And the other huge issue that we are acutely aware of is the transition from children's services into adult social care. How is the trust going to manage that? Now, the answers might be it's going to, and we might be happy with those outcomes. But we need to know beforehand what the plan is, don't we? And that's what this motion is asking us to do.
Thank you very much. Councillor Birch, could you reply for us?
Yes, just very briefly. It's very heartening to hear there's total agreement on this. We have huge responsibility as corporate parents. We're handing over this responsibility to an unknown, untested, untried body. We will have to be absolutely certain that we can do this with the best intention, with the keeping hold of that responsibility and that care that we have for our young people. The partnership working is important. We've got to have the people that we work with working with us in our communities in order to sustain this early intervention. The trust, I think, is going to be difficult to accept in many ways, and I would absolutely agree with Councillor Perry and Councillor Clark and the other people that have spoken about the scepticism we have about the information that the Commissioner is bringing to us. So if we can have the Commissioner give a report at the next Council on the intentions of delivering some of the things that really, really matter within our communities, I will be very satisfied. I thank you for your support.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you. If we can move to the vote, those in favour of the motion? Anyone against? Motion is clearly carried. The last item of urgent business, I've had none notified and no exempt items, so I'm very pleased to say at nearly 3:45 we can close the meeting, and thank you very much for your attendance and thank you for keeping roughly to time. Thank you.